Date point. 4th year. 8th month. 2nd week. AV. Series base. Sol. Drew Cavendish. You reviewed the code already? 5 of the IBM senior engineers were in the meeting, and they collectively shared the patient expression worn by all engineers when dealing with the layperson. Yes, we reviewed the code already. Completely? Completely. It's simple and efficient code. That was the whole point. Now that we're all here, Adele Park drew their attention to the arrival of the Drews. Let's get this thing started. How's your guy, Cavendish? Drew sat down. He'll have some scars to show off, but he's okay. Thanks. He meant it. Being asked that by the base's executive officer was generally a balm for his damaged morale. I'm glad. She tapped something on her tablet computer. Alright, meeting is called to order. In the chair is Adele Park, executive officer for Series Base 1, the Hephaestus LLC. The business being discussed is the critical incident of this date, its causes, effects, and how to prevent a repeat. Are there any points of order before we begin? Drew raised his hand. Point of order, Mr. Andrew Cavendish, Dig Site 1 team leader, Adele said, then extended a hand to indicate he could proceed. Drew cleared his throat. Adele, it's high time we hold a meeting concerning all of the serious, significant, and critical safety incidents that have befallen this facility since launch, he said. This is only the recent in the string of potentially deadly mishaps, and we see no trend in improvement in response to our efforts to improve facility safety. While not strictly speaking a point of order, the suggestion is well made, Adele said. The motion on the table is to expand the remit of this meeting to cover all safety incidents since the start of operations. Is there... I see several people raising their hands to second it. In fact, motion carried. Drew had already placed his thick incident folder on the table in front of him, unnoticed. Now, as he pushed it forward towards the centre, everybody looked at it. We may be at this for some time, he said. Date point. 4th year. 8th month. 2nd week. AV. Isbru. Planet Isbru. Julian Essa City. They brought 3. No longer had she said it than Julian saw them. It was overkill by anything standards. Each of the gunships put him in mind of a sturdy metallic spider, a segmented body housing the engines, pilot and gunner, and 4 long but solid legs, each one of which terminated in a core gun. Devastating firepower aimed at one target, or the ability to separately handle 4 different threats. Still, there were some obvious design flaws. The connectors were mounted high on the outside of the hull, making them an easy target, and the body didn't look like it was armoured. The whole assemblage bobbed and swayed in its own airwash, suggesting that it was a bitch to pilot and a nightmare to shoot straight, especially if the gunner was handling 4 different targets. Right, he said. We've got one big advantage on our side. Do tell. Allison sounded nervous. No thermal camera of any kind, or advanced sensors, Julian told her. If they had those, they'd have seen us both already and locked on, so we can ambush them. I could shoot out the engines. Julian considered it. The biggest and heaviest thing in the bag had been their gun, an Israeli Star-21, the designated marksman version of the Tavor assault rifle. Chambered with 5.56 as it was, and Allison being the shot he knew she was, that was probably a sure kill against the exploded and unarmored engines. People live here, he said. I don't really want to drop a crashing gunship on Ma, Pa and little baby Vizdik. He shrank down as one of the Cheshnado Mercs sought and passed his alleyway hiding place. The other 4 and Zorkrop weren't far behind him. And a crappy plan came to him. Awful though it was the only one that presented itself in a timely fashion. The band were dangerously close to knocking on Kirk and Vedrick's door. See the one on Zorkrop's far left? He asked. Yeah? Shoot him. Allison didn't acknowledge the order, but a quiet second later, there were 3 thump sounds, and the selected Chesnasho fell bonelessly to the dirt in silence with a shocked expression on his face, and a large hole right through his centre of mass. The alias snapped into formation, aiming in the apparent direction the attack had come from with commendable efficiency. 4 aliens. By human standards, they made the laughable mistake of completely failing to watch their backs. Julian didn't even bother blooding his weapons. The second none of them were watching the alleyway, he dashed out, and 2 of the mercenaries were killed by the simple expedient of slamming their skulls together with a noise like a pillowcase full of potato chips being used for a piñata. He set the third a lethal blow upside his greasy head left-handed as he moved, still astonished at how flimsy non-humans were, and threw his hatchet with the other hand. Even though the Merc's shield emitter robbed the flying axe of most of its momentum, it still embedded itself in the frog person's ribcage with enough force to lift her off her feet. It took only 3 or 4 seconds to go from the moment that Allison shot the first victim to the moment that Zorkrop was struggling in his grip with a hunting knife pressed to her throat. "Holy shit, Esther City," Allison said, clearly impressed. "I'd call off your gunships," he advised Zorkrop, pressing just hard enough to draw blood. The hovering craft had turned their core guns to face the carnage, and he was acutely aware of staring down the barrel of one of the few forms of weaponry out here in the galaxy that was truly dangerous. Yes, she agreed, and Julian congratulated himself on the way his half-baked plan had actually worked. She raised her hand to press at her earpiece. "Gunship 1. Shoot us." Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Fogtha, planet Simbreen, the far reaches. Gyotin. The problem with being the most fluent speaker of English in the little non-human enclave the crew had built for themselves was that Gyotin constantly found himself thrust into the role of spokesperson. Surrounded as they were on all sides by Deathworlders, his crew, and as the senior-ranking member of that crew, he now thought of them as his crew, and naturally walled themselves off a little, building their own habitation out of sight of the bust of the colony proper, in what he knew the humans were calling the ET Quarter. He wasn't sure if the term was degrading or not. Still, staying in touch was necessary, so he represented the non-human perspective at the Thing. He had the ears of Governor Sandy, Captain Powell, and Chief Ares, and played his role in the development of this illegal little operation. He was even beginning to like it, although he only admitted as such in his most introspective moments. There was one building that fascinated him in particular, though. And what was fascinating was that it had been one of the very first the humans had built. They called it a faith centre. From the outside, it was built with the same mix of local wood and imported materials as any other building in Fogtha, but the plan was different. Most of the others made efficient use of the space, packing as much as they could into as tiny a footprint as they could. Decorated, yes, but rarely to any enormous degree. By comparison, the Faith Centre was a large and ornate glutton for land, its own footprint supplemented by a large plot of land. It had interested him since the day they built it, but this was the first time he had worked up the courage to enter and inspect this curious Deathworlder edifice. He poked his head in the door, finding it, surprisingly, considering its obvious importance, apparently empty. The main doors led into a central hub, which was a simple, open, airy room full of comfortable seats, throw pillows, beanbags and bookshelves, and desktop computers, doubling as the town library. The doors in its 7 walls led into a variety of spaces. He inspected the books. They seemed to be segregated according to topic, but it wasn't clear to him exactly what the difference was between topics. One of the shelves was full of books with titles like Knowing God, The Purpose-Driven Life, and Grace Abounding. There were several copies of something called the Holy Bible, but the only word he recognized of those 3 was the. Another held books marked the Quran, the Messenger of Allah, the Spiritual Teachings of the Prophet. He spent some time exploring, frowning at book titles like Bhagavad Gita, Tao Te Ching, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. That one earned a double take, The God Delusion and In Defense of Common Sense. He wrestled briefly with the mystery of why Letter to a Christian Nation was not on the shelf clearly marked Christian, and the conundrum presented by Living Buddha, Living Christ, which as far as his hypothesis up to that point had decided were 2 different things, whatever they were. He gave up on the books, deciding that there was no insight into human strangeness to be found from just glancing at their covers, and that he didn't have time to read any of them, and turned his attention to the door set in the remaining 6 sides of the heptagonal hub. One led into a little corridor which contained only 2 other doors. He didn't understand the symbols on them, but a quick investigation soon cleared up that mystery. Plumbing was much the same the galaxy over. It turned out that human privies were not dissimilar to Gallian ones. Next door to that, some small rooms, one containing a table and chairs, one containing what was obviously a water heater, a refrigeration unit, and some basic food preparation equipment, and a third door, which was locked. The next room was a real mystery. It was effectively empty, containing nothing but a handful of ornate little rugs. There was something written on the far wall, but it wasn't in the alphabet used by English. It was a while puzzling over this one, that he finally heard some sign of life, and looked around to see the 7th door swing shut. Eager to get a human explanation for all of these mysteries, he did it for a few minutes, rehearsing his introduction and request before finally poking his nose through. This last room was only marginally less austere than the rug room, containing little but chairs, a large table at the front, and a lectern next to some kind of electronic device that he couldn't immediately identify. The only decorative thing within it was the window behind the table, which was tall and narrow, neatly bisecting the wall, and intersected 2/3 of the way up by a shorter, perpendicular line. The glass was densely pigmented, making it all but impossible to see through, but casting dazzling colours into the little hall as the sunlight shone through it. At first, he didn't see the person who had entered, until he advanced forward slightly and saw that she was kneeling on the floor towards the front of the room, hands clasped in front of her face. He began, rehearsed greeting forgotten. She jumped, immediately going tense, and Gayotin mentally chastised himself. Humans were Deathworlders, with an immediate fight-or-flight reflex of terrifying speed and efficiency built right into their nervous system. He had forgotten, after so long of seeing them in their domestic, peaceful life, that he was dealing with a truly dangerous being here. "Sorry," he squeaked, acutely aware that he was still figuring out their contradictory mess of a language. "I didn't mean you make jump." He thought about this, then realised he defaulted to Gaulian syntax. "To make you jump," he corrected. The girl, and she was still just barely a cub, he knew enough about humans nowadays to spot that much, relaxed and smiled, setting his skin crawling at the sight of their sturdy teeth. "It's okay," she said. "Hey, I've never met a non-human before." "Well then, hello, may I come in?" "I'd like that," she nodded. "You're Gaulian, right?" "Right. I'm Gayotin, clanless for now." Eva Rios." Gayotin tilted his head slightly as he approached. Ava's eyes looked redder than was usual for a human, and there was moisture in her cheeks. He'd never seen an expression quite like it, and with Ava lacking a corresponding translator to communicate her body language, he had to use his best guess. "Are you alright?" he asked. It seemed like a safe bet. She sighed. He knew that one, and stood up, dusting off her knees. She surprised him by being slightly shorter than he was. Gayotin was small by Gaulian standards, and Gaulian standards were small by human standards. "I'm an idiot," she said, simply. He blinked. "You are? I mean, why say that?" "I just ran off at the mouth." One thing Gayotin had got his head around with humans was the way their analogies worked. They seemed to love idiom and metaphor, and weave it into every facet of their conversation subconsciously. A more straightforward species might have said, "I said some things which I now regret having said," but he had to admit that "I ran off at the mouth" got the same message across both more swiftly and more evocatively. "That happens," he said. "You did this to... friend? Clanmate?" "Huh, I don't have a clan." Ava looked up at the window and shut her eyes. Gayotin saw a water droplet run down her face, which she wiped away with a sleeve, before turning her attention back to him, rather abruptly. "My boyfriend." "Your mate?" "Close enough, I guess. We're together." She turned away from the window. "Hey, can we head outside? Those beanbags look comfortable, and I think they had hot chocolate." "If you like," Gayotin agreed. There was an atmosphere to the room that was starting to encroach on him, a feeling tickling at the roots of his fur. He had no way to describe it. He shivered the sensation out as he crossed the threshold. "What were you doing there?" he asked. "I was just praying, asking God for help," she said simply. "And confessing." Gayotin sniffed. "I don't understand," he said. "Confessing what to?" "It's a Catholic thing," she said, as if that explained anything. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, you know." "Catholic? Your father? And sinned is what?" "I guess you don't know, huh?" "It must be a human thing." "I guess. Maybe. I've never really thought about it," Ava said. "Do you want an Ovaltine?" Gayotin summoned a term he'd heard. "I'm game. Don't know what it is, but I'm try it anyway if you want." He sat down as she heated up some water and poured it into a pair of handled cups alongside some brown powder. The resulting concoction turned out to smell incredible, and when he sipped it experimentally, he added it to his list of reasons why human weirdness might just be a good thing. "All this." He indicated the room and his books. "So alien. I think sometimes humans very strange." Ava looked around at them. "I guess. I mean, wow. That's a lot of books." She sipped her drink. "I'm not Don't ask me about it, she said. I just went to church every Sunday. Why? Because that's what we did, Ava said lamely. Because you've got to thank God. That seemed very strange indeed to Gallatin. Deciding that Ava may really not be the person to ask about these things, he changed the topic. You don't seem like an idiot to me, he said. Say what? Ava asked, thrown by the conversational tangent. You said I'm an idiot, he reminded her. Why? Ava thought about it for a minute. I guess I don't really know. I just said some really stupid and hurtful things to Adam, and I don't know why. I was just so mad at him, and I don't know why. What did you say? Gallatin asked, congratulating himself on getting the syntax right. She shook her head helplessly. If nothing else, Ava was a good lesson in human body language. You'd have to know us pretty well, I guess. I told him to go run to his dad for advice. Gallatin scratched behind his ear. That is stupid, he asked. If you need advice, talk to a father. Common sense. I told you, you'd have to know us to get why it's a problem. Gallatin imitated a human shrug for her benefit. Or maybe it's not a problem, you just... Oh, what word? Confuse? Unexpectedly, she laughed, a little strangely. Oh, God, don't say that, she protested. That just makes me feel more stupid. Gallatin was still trying to plan how to respond to that, when Ava took her turn to throw him by going off on a tangent. Hey, I just noticed. You're naked. What? You're not wearing clothes. Well, no. I usually have calves or pockets and things, but I didn't need today. Is problem? No. For some reason, this seemed to amuse her. No, it's not. She set her cup down, then unexpectedly leaned over and kissed the top of Gallatin's head. His ears tilted downwards, half out of confusion, and half so as to make room. Thank you, Gallatin. You're like a phrase Zen master, you know that? Gallatin really wasn't sure what he was being thanked for. Thank you? He asked. Any time. Ava got up. Her mood apparently very changed. She seemed happier now. I should go. Will I see you around? I'd like that, but first, what is Zen? I saw books over there have that word. Well, why don't you read one and find out? She asked. Gallatin considered the suggestion for some minutes after she left. He cleaned up the dirty mugs, and when he returned to his cushion, he had one of the books in his paws, which he opened, and took a few seconds to skip the preface and forward. He turned straight to chapter 1 and began to read. If I am asked, then, what Zen teaches, I would answer, Zen teaches nothing. Whatever teachings there are in Zen, they come out of one's own mind. We teach ourselves. Zen merely points the way. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week. AV. Ishburg. Bed Ishburg. Alison Buer. No! Suicide. The alien hellbitch has suicided rather than attempt surrender, and she'd taken Julian with her. The alien gunner didn't hesitate. Julian only had time enough to register the order, but not enough to do anything about it before the call fired, pounding a crater in the street that turned Zorkrop into a rain of vile greenish-brown chowder and filled the air with dust. Bereft of any better ideas and with tears threading her vision, she shot out the engines on all three craft. None of them even figured out where she was before they fell out of the air on cut puppet strings of smoke and fire, smashing into the road and half demolishing some poor local locale's home. She didn't melodramatically empty her magazine into the burning wreckage. Instead, she set the weapon aside and began to climb down the building, unsure why. Ugh! It was an inarticulate noise of pain and nothing more, but an unmistakably human one. Not a scream, just a low creaking moan of a man in agony. Julian! She was rewarded only with panting and heavy breathing on the open channel, but she knew where he'd been standing, and more importantly, knew that he was still alive. She grabbed the bag and vaulted off the building, dropping the 2 stories to the street below, and rolling easily with the landing, a feat she never could have managed on Earth. Julian was in bad shape. It was, at least, easy to identify which of the blood was his, and which was Chesnasho. They were very different colours. Zorkrup's last act of defiance had actually saved Julian from her own vengeance. The token resistance offered by her disintegrating body had spared him the very worst of the blast, but his legs were still peppered with gravel shrapnel, and Alison doubted there was anything she could do for his right foot. But his torso seemed undamaged, and the bleeding was manageable, especially with the state-of-the-art instant dressing foam that was part of the medic's kit they had brought with them. That, plus sticking the oral painkiller lollipop under his tongue, was about the limit of her medical ability, however. Heck of a plan, Necessity, she commented. He laughed, apparently already getting on top of the pain. Didn't go quite how I'd planned it, he admitted. Who the fuck kills themselves rather than lose like that? Kirk tiptoed delicately past some of the gunship wreckage. Somebody who is dead anyway, unless they win, he said. Julian, I'd ask if you're alright, but I can see that you're plainly not. Julian rested his head, teeth gritted. They got doctors on this planet? He asked. Of course. Good ones? You get what you pay for, but we can pay a lot. Good. Then give me a minute or two for the painkiller to really kick in. We can go get me patched up. Kirk took Allison to one side. How is he really? He asked, once they were probably out of earshot, though Julian's ears were well honed. I don't know, she admitted. I mean, I was a barista before I was abducted. I don't know shit about this. But I think he's pretty bad. Can you carry him? Kirk asked. In this gravity? No problem. Good. Because I need that doctor as well. And so do you. We do? Yes. Kirk looked around, raising his long neck to get a clear view along the street, looking toward where Vedrick was hauling his small body out of his safe house, then back down to Allison. We need to get these implants out of our heads. Date point. 4th year. 8th month. 2nd week. AV. Salvage Hunter dropship. Simbream. The Far Reaches. Captain Owen Powell. Last check, lads. That freighter's going to hit the spike in 2. Redundant though it was, the team double-checked their gear, accounted for all their magazines, tested their earpieces, and signed off ready. Hey, Captain, Lexi said. Yeah? The Welshman grinned behind his mask and sang out part of an old football chant. Who are we? Powell chuckled. Strength and fucking gar, mate. Too bloody right we are. Date point. 4th year. 8th month. 2nd week. AV. HMS Myrmidon. Simbream. The Far Reaches. Captain David Manning. The plan was, in theory, a simple one. Planet Simbream's larger moon had been home to a dragon's tooth from the moment the system had been militarized, as has several other locations across the system. Between the moon's mass, the tooth's own wormhole signature dampening field, and the impressive cloaking technology installed by the original owners of Myrmidon and Caledonia, their jump to that staging point had gone unnoticed, and from there, warping into lurk near the incoming freighter's expected arrival point had been relatively trivial. Not bad for a half-baked plan conceived in a rush. Even deploying the scavenged dropship into the heart of the swarm had turned out to be much easier than they had feared. Space was too dark and empty for much to be seen of the intense space-time distortion as the gravity spike was deployed. Even when the hapless bulk freighter slammed into the distortion at several thousand times the speed of light, the most they showed for it on any visible spectrum was a slight moving of the stars, like rocks under a clear stream. On other spectra, the reaction was instant. Huntercom's chatter tripled in volume and intensity. Even set on passive detection only, the hierarchy sensors recorded all sorts of information of uncertain significance. Neutrino bursts, ES field sweeps, dozens of ships decloaked at once, among them a formation of dropships identical to the one Powell and his men were riding. A few tense seconds ticked by as the first major failure point was met and tested. He got the call he was hoping for. No sign of any weapons fire between Hunter vessels, sir. Their deception had gone unnoticed, and he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the little craft descend on the struggling freighter, latching on and burrowing into his outer skin like a cloud of mosquitoes. Now came the real challenge. It was absolutely critical that under no circumstances should the larger ships be allowed to engage with the freighter. If the Hunters got wind of what was going on, they might just well pulverize the ship as it flew, and scavenge their coveted pound of flesh from the debris. Weapons tight. Go active. Cloak off. All cleared hot. A patch of apparently empty space solidified, and HMS Myrmidon pumped 12 Skymaster rounds into the largest Hunter ship, which had begun lining up to pierce the freighter with its boarding proboscis. The first 4 were enough to drop the shields. Great plumes of powdered metal and condensing air marked the impact sites of the remaining 8 as they smashed into the flimsy alien heat dissipation armor, which was totally unequipped to deal with the 30mm HE rounds. Something broke deep inside the target ship, and suddenly it was listing and rolling in the eerie silence of vacuum as half of its dorsal hull peeled open, spilling the crippled vessel's pressurized guts. The bridge, and Manning knew that the CIC would be even more intense, erupted into a controlled chaos of crew shouting terse, jargon-dense updates to one another. Myrmidon has several advantages over the Hunter craft. Quite aside from the fact that the aliens seemed ignorant of the possibilities of electronic warfare, there was the huge edge granted by having guns which were built around a completely different technological paradigm, against which the Hunter seemed to have no defense. Her capacitor power reserves allowed her to shunt huge amounts of energy into her engines, and her crew had the physical tenacity to put up with what were, for a ship equal in size to an ocean-based cruiser, violent hygiene maneuvers. God willing, they wouldn't need to test whether their durability was up to scratch. He heard the call he had been waiting for 12 seconds into the fighting, while the hunters were still confused and reacting sluggishly to the unexpected foe that had them in enfilade, and was taking remorseless advantage of it. Teeth seeded. He knew what that meant. It meant that all across their own hull, explosive blisters had burst, freeing out hundreds of Dragon's Teeth wormhole beacons in all directions. The battlefield was now, and would remain for several hours, a place of infinite flexibility for any human ship. He felt the slight lurch in his belly as Myrmidon completed her first jump, displacing 300 kilometers just as the first hunter vessel lined up and fired a flurry of core gun rounds at where she had been. The offending vessel caught a Skymaster volley in her engines for the trouble. Sails at 80%, somebody called. They had another 50 before Doctrine called for Myrmidon to immediately disengage to recharge. Awaiting her turn behind them was Caledonia, who had seamlessly transitioned into the battle as they left. It couldn't last forever. They had only minutes before the full might of the swarm caught up with what was going on and bore down with them. And against that many ships, no amount of ducking and weaving would suffice. The clock was ticking. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Isbuk, planet ICup. Kirk. The nearest doctor turned out to be of Kirk's own species. She was taking a nap on her own surgical table when they burst through the door. What? Who are? A human? A wounded human? We are all patients, sister, Kirk told her, but my friend here needs your attention first. She took a look at the mangled mess which was the end of Julian's leg, and focused. Get him on the table. The scanning equipment above the table started to chirp alarmingly the second Julian was in place. The doctor muttered as she reviewed it. Yes, dangerous microorganisms, but he's got the suppression implant. What in the name of Rustic is this poison flooding his system? Phenyl citrate, Allison told her, trusting the translator to convert the terms into something she could use. How much? About 400 micrograms. The doctor stared aghast for a second. That's 5 times the lethal dose. For most species, maybe, Kirk said, but I assure you he is quite safe. I suggest you focus on the injured limb. I'd heard the rumours about their physiology, but... Julian laughed, clearly a little spaced out. Doc, I'm fine, can't feel a dang thing. Doctor, the leg? She looked at it, as if seen it for the first time. Oh my, yes, I better... She examined the wound briefly, then shook her head. In the slow, long-necked way of her species. I can't save the foot, nor do I have the equipment to hand to build a prosthetic which would be adequate for a human. Just so long as he will live and heal, Doctor, Kirk reassured her. We have a lot to ask of you tonight, and tending to his wounds will be the less strange part. She ushered them toward a marked waiting area. Then leave me to work. What will be the more strange part? Each one of us wish to have our neural cybernetics removed or disabled. She stared at him. Bravo! Why? What a reason... She leaned forward slightly and studied his face. Wait, I know you. You're the politician. Ex-politician, Kirk replied. And I value my anonymity and that of my friends, Doctor. 10 Dominion development credits will allow you to upgrade from this clinic into a hospital. Bribery, brother? Yes, Kirk said, flatly. Bribery. This is important. She gave him a calculating look. 12 credits. It's a wonderful donation to the cause of healthcare in this impoverished community, and I thank you for your altruism and charity. 12 it is. The doctor looked up and off into the distance of her personal heads-up display, just long enough to see the funds transfer into her financial network, then nodded again. Very good. Now step back and wait your turn, please. Date point. 4th year, 8th month, 2nd week, AV. Refugee freighter, Simbrine system, the outer reaches. Captain Owen Powell. A quick glance around the corner. Some swift hand movements. Blitz, shoot, check, clear, repeat. It was high-speed, aggressive warfare, exactly what Powell and his men had spent their careers training to excel at. In every compartment, the hunters knew of the SBS team's presence only long enough to register being shot, and often not even that. They had already been too late for 3 poor bastards. The first was impaled to the wall by a vicious metal spike, clearly fired at high speed straight for his throat. One had been sliced to ribbons, taking 4 of the sickly white beasts down with him before they cut him apart and paused to feast. One woman was still thrashing and dying from nerve jam, blood frothing around her mouth and bitten tongue. Her murderers were denied their taste of her flesh at least, Legsy mowed them down just as they were stooping over her. It was in their fifth compartment that they rescued their first. A burly bald man, firing back at the hunters with a pulse gun from behind a table, despite where one of the spear chuckers had put a burnt gouge in his arm. "Oh, fuck! You're human! You're human, thank God!" "Quiet and listen," Powell ordered him. "Aft compartment 5. Get in the hunter dropship with all the human gear inside and stay there. We've got others to save." They moved on. He would have only hindered them. There was a lot of ship left to clear.